Welcome to the level set. We are still in Black History Month mode, despite the fact that it's March the 1st. And in that vein, we want to look at who is responsible for the preservation of our history and cultural artifacts. And so we will begin today's show after I welcome Dr. Charles Alexander and the Mike Jones and welcome you formally to the level set. I'm attorney Larry Fields. And I would ask with no further delay, Dr. Alexander, you take it away.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
Um, so I had, so again, I'm a clinical psychologist, so talk to people all the time. So um, I was talking to a young man who has some significant stressors that impact his life, and um, and so we were having a conversation about kind of the nature of his family dynamics, and um, and so as he was providing his critique on whatever his family was able to do or not able to do, I was inviting him to consider how um, how broader um, societal circumstances, were likely impacting uh, how his family was moving at a certain time. So for more context, so I'm talking to a young man who's from Florida, and we're talking about how, as far as he can remember, and part of this is because of his age, um, things things started to get challenging around 2012, and so I said, well, brother, you have to consider not just what was going on in your household, but what might have been going on locally and nationally that may have impacted what was going on for the adults in your life. And so he was like, so what do you mean? Give me an example. I said, well, at a national level, we've had some really, really, um, you know, uh, complicated and um, really kind of horrendous, political activities going on. We have President Obama in office, and we had the assault by the right. And I said that's kind of what we had going on at the local level. I said, I mean, at a national level, and we were also coming out of a recession, and so that was a national and a local piece. And I said, and that's when we had Trayvon. And the young man sat up in his chair and he was like, who's Trayvon? And my immediate thought was kind of just like shock, because this was the first time I've ever had a who is Trayvon question. And um, and so I told him who Trayvon was. And then, and cool part about it is that right when he said, who's Trayvon, like he picked up his phone and started looking for himself. And so I started to explain, and he's like, man, I was 4. And he was 4. So that's part of it. And as I started to think about it, as we continued to talk, and then subsequently, that it still wasn't just it. I mean, it's probably because he was 4 that he didn't understand it real time in context. But then the next thing that came to mind for me is, so what's going on that for the next 14 years, he didn't have, there was no introduction for him to the circumstances surrounding the murder of Trayvon Martin. So for a kid in Florida to grow up and not have any sense that this occurred in his lifetime. And so, that's part of what brought me, I've really been pondering it since I had that conversation with him. And so that's kind of what brought me to the question, who's responsible for the preservation of cultural knowledge and history? Yes, sir.
Charles, as you were saying that, I had got a response that it's not a counterpoint, but it shows the degradation of our cultural and historical context over a couple generations. So that young brother sounds like he's old enough, about the age of a grandchild of mine, right? He's in his early 20s, right? I got grandchildren now in their early 20s, so they're adult. But Trayvon was murdered when he was 4. Emmett Till was murdered when I was about 7, I guess, something like that. It was 56 when Emmett Till was murdered. Okay, I'd be 7 years old. But my point is, in real time, I didn't know anything had happened to Emmett Till. But it was impossible to grow up in a black community anywhere in America and not by the time you were in high school, getting out of high school, knew who Emmett Till was and what happened to Emmett Till and who did it to him and the context of which and that was just an organic part of your transitioning to adolescence and adulthood, because this is the kind of stuff you need to know, because this is the kind of place you live in.
That you live in.
Okay. Yeah. And that was organic to black people, black adults raising black children. So you'd have heard about it. If your parents didn't tell you about it, you'd have heard about it at the barbershop, down the street. I mean, literally, there was no way to avoid the reality of being black in America. It was the advantage of going to segregated schools, because a black teacher could tell you you got to work twice as hard, be twice as smart to probably get half as much. Now, you can be pissed off about that, but that's going to be the game you got to face with. And then you just got to figure out how to play the game then and win. Not just play and participate, but play and win. But you can't start bitching about the cheating, because cheating is what they going to do. Now, that's a different frame of reference for a kid matriculating through adolescence to adulthood. And that denigration of what has happened to us is really makes, for me, what makes us so vulnerable in this moment. I just wanted to make that frame of reference. So in 2 generations, you've
Mhm.
gone from me to that young brother that you're talking about, because at 22 years old wasn't no way for 18, wasn't no way for me not to know who Emmett Till was.
Mhm.
Is
And
this an act of avoidance that we're dealing with now, Doc?
for some, and so this is again where the thing, it becomes layered, and we don't understand the implications of some of the other things that we say. So, for example, so if we acknowledge that we are oppressed, then we got to do a better job of discussing the implications of that, aside from uh, the acquisition of material wealth or the lack thereof, right? And so
Conspicuous consumption.
so usually when we're having a conversation about oppression, we're usually talking about it in some kind of economic or material sense. We're not talking about it in terms of what it actually does to the mind and body.
The weathering effect.
We don't talk about the weathering effect, and we don't talk about the impact just on our minds. And so if if we are
Can you
oppressed,
talk about the weathering piece for a second, Doc?
well, so weathering is a concept that came about. I mean, the larger concept is probably very, very old, but in the past 10 or 15 years or so, I believe this white female sociologist, I believe she is, was writing on was researching and writing on a disproportionate um, health
Disparities.
or actually, let's just change it. She's writing on the health disparities that exist between um, white women and black women, and she was noting that as a result of the oppression, our it's a weathering effect for men and women, but she was writing about women in particular that the black woman's body ages faster, and so the forces the forces or the pressures of oppression cause for the body to literally have to mature faster in order to cope. And so that's kind of fundamentally what the weathering effect is about. And so, but also within that piece is that there's typically some heightened level of anxiety, which causes your system to work harder, kind of to maintain, seeking a level of homeostasis. And that homeostasis comes once you get to a point of safety. But if you're in a oppressed group, you don't ever get to that. And so your system is always functioning in this fight or flight state, which ultimately, well, one of the things that it does by design is it lessens, or it's not even a lesson, it interrupts the functioning of your what's the name of the system that wards off?
Parasympathetic system.
Not your parasympathetic. Well, you don't even get to your
Your
parasympathetic.
immune
Yeah,
system.
yeah,
Your
yeah.
immune system.
Your immune
Your
system.
immune system. Yeah.
Right.
And so
That's
the
why,
way
and that's why we wind up with all these autoimmune diseases.
that's why we end up ill. And so, but the quick and easy of it is that when you're fighting or running from a bear, your body don't need to be fighting disease, right? And so that's how we built. And so we're built so that those things that so what's working at a given time is what's needed for the given time. And
The body
so
prioritizes.
right, and so your body shifts, and it literally kind of shuts down your immune system when you're in fight or flight. Well, if you stay in fight or flight, if you're stuck in that space because of the stressors of life, then your immune system, starts to fail you. And one way is it's literally not working efficiently, because on the one hand we're structured to shut it down so that we can meet the threat. On the other hand, when it is functioning, it can easily get overwhelmed, right? And so it's not is not working efficiently for that reason too. So so we have to think of it in that manner. And so that's kind of that's kind of like fundamentally how we end up in this having this weathering piece. And
Charles,
so uh-huh.
now I want to ask you a question by extending the metaphor
Mm-hmm.
that given the the immune system and the flight or fight almost we're genetically predisposed to one of them when danger happens. That's how we survive as a species.
Mm-hmm.
Then the first time the threat is no longer apparent, our natural instinct is to want to dial back the the fight or flight instinct. So if our threat of white America looked like this, what it looked like in the 1930s, the 1870s, the 1950s, when Trayvon Martin was killed, we were not imprinted with that, but literally every generation could recognize the threat and knew what we were in flight or fight mode. When the oppression becomes less overt and let's say more intellectual or it deals more with your internal architecture as opposed to the external architecture of your environment, then in almost instinctively, intuitively, you dial back your defense mechanisms because from a cognitive standpoint, you don't see the threat anymore, and
Mm-hmm.
the threat looks like it's removed, and so there are those of us who are more instinctive. We're like lions or about hyenas. If a lion never met a hyena, never saw one, it would be something that would go off that would say, I don't know what that is, but that's something if I'm a male adult, I ought to try to kill that. Okay. And I don't even know what it is. And the hyena would see the danger in the lion, even if they had never seen one. If they met in the zoo, I think genetically that would be their response to each other. For us, as our situation evolved or our circumstances evolved, I'm not going to say improved, just say evolved, and the oppression looked different. We were wired to recognize a more overt uh, physical threat and not the more subliminal threats that we encountered post civil rights. And we didn't have a way of transferring that from one generation to the other because the prior generation did not have this new lived experience and could not identify the pattern recognition that hadn't happened yet. So we got a couple generations who now have a whole different frame of reference and they're getting eaten up alive, uh, almost literally speaking, because they can't identify being in danger like they are now. If you're our age and older, you see it in my basic response is that's what it looks like now. Okay, I always say where did this come from? That's what it looks like now, because it looks like what I was intuitively taught to be aware of. But I was thinking, to make Willie Mays and Hank Aaron are two of the greatest ball players in the history of baseball. Period. No question about that. But they also played ball in Jim Crow, They started in the Negro League. They knew they knew Jackie Robinson. They knew the impact of all of that. And they made a very good living. But how do you explain, and this is not, I don't know Mookie Betts, and so this is not a knock on him, but how do you explain, how does Hank Aaron or Willie Mays, if they was here, explain to Mookie Betts to making $25 million a year about what it means to still be a black ball player? I mean, part of the issue is we also don't have the vocabulary
Mhm.
to
Mike,
to
Mike,
to
Mike,
explain it.
Mike, I think that and I agree with you to a large extent, but I think that Mookie Betts knows that though. I think that
No, that's
racism,
why I said that's why I
yeah.
said I wouldn't pick it on him. But I'm saying
No,
if you
no,
take
I
somebody
no, no.
making 25, yeah.
I will say the modern black athlete and the modern white athlete understand that they will never be one of the owners. And I say that because we have, I think, just been given an inside look, a microcosm on America in this book that has been recently published by D. Maurice Smith, the former president of the NFL Players Association, who lays out the case beautifully on how Mr. Football, Tom Brady, was put in his place by the owners. And it became very, very clear. But
But
I,
that's a class issue, Larry, not
you,
a ethnic threat.
you are 100% correct. But that class, of course, permeates down to us, and there's still some problems. But I have been grappling with a personal interaction that I had. I was having lunch with a wonderful black surgeon who goes into detail with some of the issues he's had, the racist issues, to the extent that he told his son that I wish for 24 hours I could put black or white skin on so I don't have to feel the implications of being black. Um, which begs to the question of why is there not a specific locale that is housing these things, and why are we not fully taking advantage of the things that we have? Because that is number one, it broke my heart, but number two, you should know better at this point. But go ahead. I mean, I really don't even I really haven't even addressed it yet because I don't feel like I have the tools um, to deal with it in a manner that needs to be dealt with. But that's an issue that this canon that you're talking about, Dr. Alexander, was certainly overcome.
But Larry, to that point, you just raised a point that better than I did, which is and that is in that prior time, and I'll just say my growing up period, that if you were black, class did not overcome caste. Okay, you couldn't be rich enough not to be black because, to Charles's point, what the threat of racial oppression in America changed look. It developed a different strategy and a different look. And as that happened, black folks who elevated from a class standpoint could think, because there's nobody around to tell them, could think that they literally have escaped the caste oppression. Now, poor black folks don't get to believe that because whether it's caste or class, they're at the bottom of it anyway, and all of it looks like, and all of it's terrible, and it all looks the same.
And you don't
But
have time when you're in survival mode to have those silly thoughts in your head anyway.
Yeah, you run, okay? Like Cedric's line, it say when black folks run, when everybody start running, then ask why was you running, okay? But you
Right.
don't ask at the beginning, and and staying with that metaphor example, when you're rich, you ask the question, well, do I have to run? I know y'all running, but do I have to run? And if this was 1940, 1870, 1950, your rich ass would be running just like everybody else. Because if everybody's black running, I'm black too. I got to get up. I got to get up out of here. So that's what I mean. You mentioned not having the tools to deal with it, and that's what I meant when I said the vocabulary. That that, and I'm gonna do something that I'm probably gonna get technically wrong, but but explaining you can't use Newton's physics to explain Einstein's universe. Okay, that's a total different equation. If we were in a physics class, and say this don't look like that. Okay, I can here's the equation that explains Newton's universe. What Einstein looks like, universe looks like in a physics form is a totally, Newton's universe is stable and don't move. Einstein's universe actually bends. I mean, literally, at any given moment, it's got different shapes depending on the interaction of these forces. Now, I failed physics in high school, so don't take that as a literal concept, but just making a poetic argument.
Well, I did surprisingly well in physics, particularly seeing how underrepresented we were in that class. Um, in the face of a person that didn't think that black students knew how to think through physics, and that we could only do what we're doing here today and apply them. There's no way in the world you can, if you wrote down what you did on the playground, Mike, hitting a guy with a pass that's running 30, between 25 and 30 miles an hour on stride, where he's going to be, as and not well, and dribbling the basketball and looking at the whole court. That is the true applications of physics. So physics, and we know physics. So, but
It was
it,
an all black class that I failed in too. So by the way, I
well,
can't blame.
and I understand. I understand, but a lot of that is mindset. Had I had
Yeah,
the
it was.
had I had the calculus teacher that I had at Morehouse, I would have majored in math. I had a wonderful math teacher, but I don't want to get away from the point. But the point that I wanted to make is that we are applying the utility of this canon that we need. We've talked about two very, very real life situations that would be mitigated if we had a place and that was, centrally located, or that or places that we can identify, and we can, if we sit here and think about it enough, that's responsible for the preservation of our cultural history. And
And
so,
I asked you,
So go ahead, Mike.
Charles, go ahead. No, okay. I was just going to ask, and Charles, you can be the first to answer this. You two are distinguished graduates of easily one of, if not the elite black university in America. One would think that one of the responsibilities, obligations of those institutions, especially given why they were founded, would be to curate and expand that so that you know, that this is where you go to study, research, find out fundamentally. And I know we get a lot of our money from white folks, and that ain't what white folks give you money for. But the interesting part was in the 19th century when we started all these places, we got our money from white folks when most white folks didn't want black people to be educated at a higher level. So in a more hostile environment, they actually did major, almost revolutionary kind of work, producing a class of individuals that will become the Du Boises and the Carter G. Woodsons et al. You
It
had
seems,
high school.
Mike, it seems the further we get from the lash, the softer we get, and the
It
less
is.
resolve we get. We don't have the resolve. I want Doctor to address that question because I know he can deal with it. But you're talking about a group of individuals that took their own funds and founded Lincoln University here in Missouri. Right after the Civil War.
Right.
Yeah, you're talking about a bunch of individuals that fought for legislation. We haven't had new legislation since 1968.
And we got 60 black members of the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and I wonder how many of them have a grasp on international leaders that they could unite with, proffer and to advance our interests. So I mean, when in fact I know Bill Clay could talk about those in power in the diaspora. I mean, even when we've talked to civil rights leaders, they could tell you what was going on in the revolutionary struggles in other places. Some sort of way, that's been lost, and our interests have been synthesized to performative, episodic movements. That's what it appears to be. But Doc, if you don't mind answering Mike Jones' original question, I know I've had a long interruption. If you need to repeat the question, have the question repeated, please let me know.
I need the question repeated.
Please repeat the question, Mike.
Well, the short version, because that's all I can remember now. The short version, the short version is why wouldn't particularly the elite private black universities that that claim the black mantle of black intellectual academic excellence, why would part of their mission be, I mean, just almost foundationally, the maintenance and curation of the story, the journey, the culture, whatever you want to be, so that if you wanted to know about us from our perspective, you got a place to go. The piece I sent you all, a couple of weeks ago about the Black History Remembering Forward, and that's literally what this would be, remembering uh, uh, forward. But you would think that that would be stay intuitive to us.
Yes.
And my point was that canon that Larry talked about. Now I remember is outside of, but adjacent to whatever the American thing is.
It's,
That our stuff is not in that stuff. It's adjacent because they're happening at the same time, but they ain't the same thing. And I don't even want my shit included with their shit.
but that's a level of about of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson would say, that's a level about yourselfness that these folks don't have right now.
Well, don't let
Institutionally,
I
almost.
can't. I can't remember the question again, so let y'all
No, no,
answer.
no, 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 no. Go ahead. And I'm just going to add. And why don't and add to that question? Why don't we have black university presses either?
I mean, that part is easier. And this is another thing where I just think we end up a little off in our analysis, and that is so X number of the institutions have whatever they have. They have so like I don't know whose papers Morehouse holds, but I know that um, the Atlanta University, the Clark Atlanta University, they have an art library that holds some significant number of the artworks of Black artists and that. I mean, so some of our educational institutions are repositories for various things. I think in that case the issue is more understanding what you can get from where. But so like I'm Clark Atlanta has some amount of of Du Bois's writings, but Amherst has the most, I believe. I think Amherst has the largest collection of his writings. Um, but the other part of it, and the more simple part, again, in other conversations, we note that the HBCUs have been shorted at bare minimum of $12 billion, and so and that's not even a lifetime shortage. That's a number that has been calculated based sometime from the '90s forward. And so if we get back into that fight or flight thought, the immediate thought for X number of institutions is not how we store history, is how we keep the lights on. And so it in the essence of, or in the context of survival, that part isn't the number one piece. And so I do think we have to kind of keep that in mind. But now, that being said, um, I mean, so we look at Lincoln versus, because Lincoln is Lincoln what 18, what is that, 65, 66, somewhere in there, 67.
I
Um,
think in I think in say in the 1870s, I know you're safe.
and so I mean that was an oddity. That was an oddity in the midst of other HBCUs that you had the five soldiers, literally commit, each of them committed, I think, what was equivalent to a year's salary in order to launch this project. And so, A, because we don't always know how some of these things came into being, and B, because we have a tendency to overgeneralize the greats of the past. There's more people thinking probably that what they did was more the norm than probably what happened at in the Atlanta University Center or at Howard, when essentially these were white folks who did this, and we were able to benefit kind of in context, right? And so, but that's why it is important. That's why the question is even important. And really, I'm not even talking about at this moment specifically where the repository is in a kind of an institutional sense, and the curation occurs in an institutional sense. Um, I'm talking about kind of like, where do we start? And I think part of why we lose so much history is because fundamentally our thought is that it's going to be some institution there it should be some institution that's responsible for the preservation, when in reality that's everybody's responsibility. And then it gets reflected in, our institutions.
So you're telling me that
So,
as the patriarch of my family, I have a responsibility to maintain a library, to maintain all of to the best that I can, the narratives from our elders, and we've had the foresight to have uh, the filming and recording of several of the elders in our family. And that's something that we should do on a micro level.
Yeah, I
let
mean,
me, let,
go ahead, Mike.
no, I was just going to say, Charles, to your point, although I was using the HBCs as a specific place and thing, the reality, my question implied the thing that curation at a metaphysical level, not literally,
Mm-hmm.
not just very, and it kind of alludes, and so Larry's answer kind of speaks to that larger question because my issue is that doesn't seem to even be a question we wrestle with trying to answer. Okay, that we're not in search of the things or the thing that could actually do this for us because we know we're going to need this in every generation for as long as we're here in a place like the United States.
And and at that individual level, it's the same issue as is at the institutional level. And if
Right.
circle back to the young man, quite simply, his family got other things to worry about than Trayvon. Right? I mean, that's ultimately where it comes down to. And so for us who live wherever we live and we're listening to whatever's going on in Florida, we only thinking about Trayvon. And then if we ain't thinking about Trayvon, we thinking about the other young brother got shot at the gas station. If we ain't thinking about neither one of them, then we just thinking about, how the governor is crazy and he's suppressing education and Black history. But we're not thinking about, if that's what they're doing at the school level and the education level, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis to oppress the people, right? And so wherever this thing is, it exists. It just necessarily exists, at at our to our detriment. So some quick neural anatomy. So what happens when
Good, good. Thank you.
when we are always under this, um, you know, particularly for this conversation, three things get impacted. And so again, we talked about the fight or flight space. And oppressed people, we're always in fight or flight. And so one of the things that comes with the fight or flight is constant cascades of stress hormones. These stress hormones have both a structural and functional impact on the brain. And so, first of all of the stress, that blood, it literally, degrades and eats away at brain matter. And it also does the same kind of so we got nerve cells, and these nerve cells have they got arms or dendrites that help them to connect, and that's what we need in order for our circuitry to work. Well, the stress hormones, again, it eats away at that. It eats away at brain mass, and it eats away at brain connections. And so, for example, the prefrontal cortex, that's where all the magic happens. That's where we plan and execute, right? Well, you end up with shrinkage because of the damage of the stress hormones. And so So that's one piece. And so that's the prefrontal cortex. That's where our executive function, again, planning and execution and all that kind of stuff. The other part that gets significantly damaged because of this is the hippocampus. The hippocampus that's where it's kind of fundamental and foundational to learning, because that's where memory storage occurs. And so similarly, all of uh, the stress hormones, they degrade and damage, that system. And then it also impacts our amygdala, and this kind of gets to part of what we were talking about. This kind of, in a very central way, gets to what we were talking about in terms of, people's perception of the threat in the past versus now. When your amygdala is damaged, that's essentially what happens. Your threat matrix is off, because that's in part of what the amygdala does. It is responsible for emotional regulation, and it is responsible for assessing threat and then informing the rest of the brain that a threat even exists. And so if those three things are constantly degraded because of the constant threat, then you just it's literally just a never ending kind of piece in terms of what's happening. And so we don't, and because we don't learn this stuff in that way, then we don't understand it as a layer. And again, we stay in this other space when we're even having the conversation. When we're having the conversation about the impact of oppression, we're usually talking about what we don't physically and materially have or have access to. We're not always talking about really what should be the more central issue is what, because that, Larry, goes back, like, so this piece that I'm just saying, this is the foundation of the weathering. And so the brain starts to age quicker because it's trying to address an immediate threat. But the brain is like a perfect example of the John Henry syndrome. So if the myth of John Henry trying to beat a steam engine through this mountain, and then he dies. That's how our brain works all day, trying to fight this thing.
Could I ask you a question, Charles?
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not literally expecting you to answer, but your hypothesis on it. What you just described is a set of circumstances that we're in that create an irreconcilable contradiction, that the immediate threat degrades all of the brain, the mental, of our mental capacity to do long-term thinking, planning, execution. And so, writ large, it's a clear physical answer about why we function so badly in times like this. So I'll stipulate that I understand that rationale. My question for you to have a hypothesis on, because that's really what it is. But that's always been our situation. That's always been the case. But we found ways to overcome that, because basically the three of us here are products in large measure, not just of our day-to-day environment, but that body of work that was kind of left for us, that we found a way that it helped explain this reality to us. So we've also been able to put in the environment the answer to the problem. The question is, in your opinion, how they're clearly not connected today. They were connected at one point, because if you take E. Franklin Frazier, Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, they're not giving you answers about what you're going to fix this week. They're giving you long range context so you can understand and plan a strategy. I mean, they took this stuff and said, I know what you're looking at, but let me tell you what you see. And now that you see, you can understand. And once you understand, you can't go back. So now you can move forward. I mean, so what what's your speculation on what came loose between those two contradictory things that we used to have, apparently, historically, had integrated at some substantial level?
And so for that, I think the issue is we had some pretty concrete things that were so we lived in an apartheid system, period, right?
Right,
And so we went from chattel slavery to apartheid at best, right?
right,
And so freedom versus slavery, that's easy. I mean, in terms of a dichotomy, that's an easy win to process, right?
okay,
Even though it wasn't, I mean, so again, when we go back and we look at all of that, that wasn't great either,
right,
right? But it was better than being enslaved, right? And so then we have, we have this again, the we go from state sanctioned chattel slavery to state sanctioned apartheid. So in the state sanctioned apartheid, the range of things that we were fighting, you know, being taxed and not having access to public facilities, like that fundamental piece right there, most black folks don't even contemplate in terms of the argument about, you know, Brown versus Board of Education. This thought that we was just trying to sit in class with white folks. No, we was paying for white folks to get a good education and wasn't getting our wasn't getting, funding for our stuff. That's what precipitated the arguments. That's what the fights were about. That's what the fights were about in Missouri. That's what the fights were about everywhere. And so, but many of us don't understand it as such. And so, but the thing is, under that caste system, it was the enemy was just very clear. You know, I can't go. Boom. That that's what it was. And I can't do. I can't get. I can't go, and I can't do. That was pretty simple. Coming out of the '60s, that same fight just got very, very vague because again, they intentionally made some changes, in as much as they made some amendments, what becomes acts and amendments, in terms of our constitutional rights. They also, the overt enemy also made some changes in terms of what the challenges were going to be. And so part of what we see is so even in the question um we're comparing our collective response to some pretty overt stressors to our perception of the collective response to a more diffuse threat that is as ever present as it's ever been. Right. And so in terms of what we're looking at, I just think so like and so the folks who are going through it are also, we're also making the same analysis. We're making our analysis based on the worst situation. So we generally experience this freedom of movement as freedom, as an end, as opposed to a means. So too many of us are really just kind of caught up in what we can do. And so since we can do it, we don't interpret this necessarily as the worst thing in the world until Trayvon gets shot. So each time there's a police shooting, and again, 1,000 folks get shot by the police every year. We're not talking about it right now because ain't nobody in the streets talking about it. And so the news ain't talking about it. And right now, when we are talking about it, we only talking about it because of ICE, as if Black folks ain't still getting shot, right? And so that's another layer of this whole piece, is because so those things that I noted before, this just this impact of oppression, it gets layered, or that process of weathering and that process of brain dysfunction as a result of the oppression, it also gets expedited. The pace of that also gets expedited by the use, as a result of the use of propaganda and disinformation. Because most propaganda, most governmental propaganda and disinformation is threat-based. So it's literally our threat matrix on steroids. So that process has been expedited even further. And so our planning and execution, really is compromised. That is fundamental to oppression, is that your planning and execution and your assessment of the threat, they are all compromised at an individual and subsequently at a collective level. That is what happens. And so then if we start throwing in these other things, and we start throwing in Bobby Wright's menticide, if we start throwing in Azebo and Kobe Cambone's psychological misorientation, and we start to again kind of look at what this looks like from a social and emotional level, this is how our behaviors start. This is what we need in order to better understand, the manifestation of our thoughts and actions
As
a result of the oppression.
I got a follow-up question. As I was listening to you, I was sitting here thinking, all we have to do, and everybody's seen the movie, they've seen all three of them. We just need to look at the matrix and explain. He said, "Did you understand that? That's what's happening to us."
That's what's happening now. Yes.
Literally, I mean,
yes.
what the last part of what you just described was the matrix. Okay.
And I think that's why we like those movies at a level,
okay.
right? Because it resonates. I mean, when you was talking about Cedric, I think why that's probably one of the more fundamental things to all the things Cedric done. People gonna remember that,
right?
Because that's central to our response, which is why it's funny,
right?
Because everybody can resonate with that, right? And with the Matrix, what I do think happens with the Matrix is that I think we have a sense of what we're looking at, but with the Matrix, we get caught up in the mysticism of it. Right.
Yeah, right.
And so
now, I as you were talking, I could get it to its lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
And if you reduce it to the lowest common denominator, what you just described is the matrix for Black folks.
Yes, and that's what it is. And in order to work in that space, it requires pattern recognition. But again, that's one of the things that's steadily you know, kind of destroyed by this process. And with all of this downward pressure, it's it's just probably more frequent than not that we understand or at least appreciate that on a day to day, there's a significant number of people who are literally trying to survive. So they not this don't get prioritized. It's something else that gets prioritized. But that's how this all looks. Like a couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about the default mode network. Well, if you're always under duress, you don't get into the default mode network. So you don't get to be self-reflective. You know what I'm saying? You only are self-reflective enough not to make the same mistake that you made yesterday that didn't work out and got you feeling like you're feeling today. Like you don't really have that ability, and really energy to kind of go back and make, go back and learn and engage in broader systems. But so that's kind of what it probably looks like in general. And we know it looks like that for a disproportionate amount of our population who they don't have the time or resources to kind of be in this space. Now, in terms of repositories, for that stuff, again, we got to look at it in terms of like, so for those things that already exist, you got to understand that those things are also under assault. And now they're under assault for the same reasons that everything else is under assault, is because this current administration said we're not funding Jack Doodle squat. That looks like it's going to remind us of the historical facts, right?
Well, to that point, Charles, and I'm going to kind of stay with this line of reasoning that you're with, and that basically to understand Trump, and I'm not talking about literally Trump, but the puppet masters of a Trump is they have to restore the matrix that they had everybody in. And that ability to control reality has broken down. Okay, because basically any social construct is literally just a collection of agreed upon fictions that we decide to recognize and comply with each other, because it makes everything work for each one of us. But in order for that any system to work, everybody has to have bought into the agreed upon fictions. And when the agreed upon fictions don't work anymore, the social integrity of whatever the system is breaks down. And that's clearly what's happened in the United States. And they're trying, rather than come up with a new set of agreed upon social constructs, fictions, they decided to reimpose by force the old one that probably won't work, not because they don't have enough force, it's just because it's obsolete and don't work anymore. Okay, and the agreed upon fixtures that you have at any given point in time, you have them not because they're morally correct, it's just because they work. And you and this becomes what a paradigm shift looks like, a collapse of one reality and the emergence of a new reality that everybody will figure out how they function in this set of agreed upon social fictions that we call a society and a culture.
And then how that starts to look for us is, kind of, and within the context of the same conversation, is our ability to say that something happened and not know how and why it happened.
Right.
And so then we can't replicate. So that's the other reason. So the other reason we can't function the way that we function is because we don't understand today how structured the movement was and its response to external threats. Right. So we really believe that whatever we just got because Dr. King talked because he talked at the Washington Monument. Like we don't know who was there. And I mean, we know that them people came, but we don't know nothing about the Big Six, right? We don't know nothing about the conversation. We don't know nothing about. We don't know that march was really more a culmination of A. Philip Randolph's work than it
I was gonna
was
say you got to go
Delonge.
back. You got to go back
Yes,
30 years. You got to
yes,
go back 30
yes,
years
yes.
to the antecedents of the
We,
march. The
and
first
so
march on Washington, right?
we don't know those things, which again, a part of that has to do with the fact that we continue to say they're not teaching us. They're not going to teach you. That's part of the oppression. And so when your threat matrix is off, you don't understand that. And so since you don't understand that, you can't plan and act accordingly. That's what oppression does. But we don't we're having a problem and necessarily so
Well,
because
if in
of
fact you can taste the poison, it
it might be too late, right?
it's too late. So you're never going to taste the poison if the poison is going to be effective.
And so, like, yeah, so that's kind of the whole thing. And so it really requires the intentional behavior. Like, because it ain't that we absolutely don't have time, is that too many of us are choosing and opting to do other things other than this. And this part, which is really kind of the most crucial, we keep thinking that the person who's causing it is going to fix it. But that's really kind of how you know that we are oppressed and traumatized as a result of that. And so like people be talking about definition of what's the word they be using? Insanity is keep doing the same thing, hoping to getting the right answer. First of all, that's not the definition. That's my man. That's Einstein's definition.
Right.
That is his definition. So we don't even get that right, right? So so we take Einstein's misappropriation of the concept and apply it to the science, right? We be like, oh, so the definition? No, that's Einstein's definition. And the thing about the whole concept is that it's not a mental health or psychological piece. That's a law piece. That comes. Insanity. That's a legal term. That ain't a medical term. And it really only means right from wrong, right?
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
And Charles, and I can't remember if it was Young or whoever it was that said maybe insanity is a rational response to an insane world.
To an insane world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So I forgot who that was, but yeah, they ain't crazy. He just responded to what he sees.
Right. And so so all of these things are kind of going on, and so that other part of this is we can't respond. So there's a structural reason why we don't respond like we responded in the past, and that's because we can vote and we can eat just about wherever we want to eat, and
Right.
we so the overt um the overt application of or manifestation of the caste system is no longer right. Now they're rolling back voting rights, but we seem not to really understand that. And so, but again, that's kind of what happens. Our memory get convoluted because of all of the disinformation. And so, we don't understand Dr. King. We don't understand Malcolm. We think we understand Malcolm. We don't understand Malcolm. We don't understand the Panthers. So we can't really do what the Panthers did because we don't understand the Panthers. You mentioned, we were having a brief conversation about some of the Panthers in the green room. I mean, much of what people actually think about the Panthers is stuff that Eldridge Cleaver did or said during times when Huey or the other brother was in jail.
Bobby Seale.
So when Seal and Huey were dealing with their legal issues, it was Eldridge Cleaver that went left with everything attached with the symbolisms of the armed resistance, when that really wasn't the intent. The intent was not a armed resistance. The intent was we're gonna watch the police and protect our communities. And so, but if you don't read that, or find somebody who has read that, then you kind of get caught up in the imagery and the false narratives, and many of those false narratives don't really come from us. They come from the enemy. So we have really kind of built our thoughts about the Black Panthers in particular based on how J. Edgar Hoover wanted them described, right? Which is other than how Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale intended. But the other part of that is we don't understand that is because we don't understand that, like, literally as soon as it became a thing, they were under assault, and them guys was either in jail or fighting to stay out of jail.
And Charles, given what you just said, and given we're in the United States in March 1st, 2026, that if you're Black in America, you have no basis for being shocked or outraged about the politicalization of the Justice Department. Okay, that's funny. Now this is the first. It's not even the first time it's been imposed on white folks. Because if you got the Red Scare or around World War One, right after the Russian Revolution, so this is just the 21st century version of a politicized. But there's never been a time in America that, since the founding of the United States, that the federal government would not use the Justice Department to restore what it thought was the order of the political order. I'm not talking about law and order. I'm talking about the political order. So Trump and them, to use a term of art from our vocabulary, they ain't making this up. They doing something that has been done before. And the crazy part is that I'm not talking about Fox now, but that the mainstream media refuses to connect those historical dots because it doesn't align with the propaganda story of the creation myth. And so Trump has to be an outlier, and this has to be a new thing and not a reemergence of a pattern that has always been there whenever elites in power feel like their status is fundamentally threatened, whatever that looks like. And my position is that the elites in power in the 50s and the early 60s supported the civil rights movement and overturned the American apartheid caste system, not because they had changed their mind about black people, but because it was not uh, conducive to their international hegemony that they were trying to create and then maintain. So they will sell out white people too, because they sold out the same white people that were supporting them and creating uh, uh, this oppressive system. They literally sold them out in the 50s.
And they
And
keep selling them out, right? And
huh?
so
Hell, they
and
always do it.
I mean, it could be art like so from a philosophical and technical point of view, they're not selling us out.
Right,
This is just the nature of it for us.
right, exactly.
They sell out marginalized white folks every day in
Every day.
order to make it look what it needs to look like to justify what they do to us.
Right,
And because those clowns think that that's what it means to be white, they keep signing up. And so, but since that's what they're basing it on and not their actual well-being, it makes sense because the value to them is white supremacy. The value to them is not a sustainable life,
right.
right? So in their case, they're just making a bad decision, right? They getting sold out, and because of the way that they process it, they don't feel like they're getting sold out, and they don't feel like it's a bad
Because
decision.
they protect their whiteness.
They protect their whiteness, right? And so for them, it makes more sense for nobody to have insurance than for black folks to have it.
Right.
Because
Killer bee.
ultimately I'm white, and I don't need the government. Oh, okay. And so have at it. That makes sense to them. That
Well,
made
I feel
sense
like
to
this.
them in the Confederacy, and that makes sense to them jokers now.
And the little edit I would do there is basically I'm white, and if somebody black can have this too, it must not be of any value.
It must not be white.
It must not be white. If
Right.
somebody black can do it, then it must not be white.
Double
Yeah.
entendre. I love the use of white in that spirit.
And so this is the thing that we're like just kind of constantly under, but this the it is our history and our understanding of our history, our culture, our arts. These things literally are the cure. Like we have to be more intentional, and it does start with you know it does start at the household level, and
Let's
then
say,
it grows.
say what the cure is, because
Well, I
if
got I
for
got
some, no, let me go back. What
okay.
things are the cure, Doc?
And so you literally have to have right information in order to combat disinformation, right? Like just fundamentally. And as you and so you got to have right information, and and that's across things. That's our cultural, cultural, historical information, and it's also our understanding, you know, of how this thing is supposed to work. So we got to have both. We got to have an understanding of how this thing is supposed to work, and then in which will then, in theory, add clarity relative to how it is working, so that we can then respond accordingly. Mike Jones.
I was going to say that is correct and extended. I'm my answer to Larry's question is we need to be vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what
Breast inoculation.
yeah, and here's what the vaccination is. All you got to and this was a saying a long time ago, and it was even the lead song in the play Memphis. We get to be black on Saturday night, and once you've been black on Saturday night, you would never want to be white. And that sums up the totality of that experience, because fundamentally, even in the worst of times, and even when we struggled and some of us was trying to figure out how to get over to the other side, our collective, almost subconscious will was being black meant something. So literally, I don't, outside of some very bourgeois black folks or some really oppressed Stephen black folks, I never met anybody black that wanted to be white growing
Mhm.
up. I mean, literally. I mean, the idea of if we could be white was an alien concept because you would look at what it meant to be white and you say, I don't ever want to be that. And even Larry Bird, when he playing ball, he said, don't put, he said, man, if you put a white guy on to guard me, that's the insult. Okay,
Mhm.
so I'm a better player than I'm not that guy, and so what I'm saying is we need a shorthand once again for what it means to be and value being black.
Mhm.
And it happens inside of literally it's Saturday night juke joint in Sinners. Now the vampires are on the outside, but inside the joint.
And, and,
That
and you've
that's
been
the essence
fine
of
in your juke joint if you ain't let them jokers in.
that's it. And that's it. You got to keep them on the outside. That's what it means to be black and stay black. We in the juke joint, and no, y'all can't come in.
May I read this passage real quick?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Okay, this is from Fanon. I may have read it once before, but this gets to the heart and the crux of it because what you're talking about is a foundation that is strong enough to identify things. And I don't, and it's maybe for another show, but we don't have foundation enough to even state that the system is rigged. We almost blame ourselves. And today, Dr. Alexander, you challenge the actual system as opposed to this individual ruggedness that we've learned to impute. But once again, he said the power of the colonist message, the systems used to impose it and present it as the truth were such that most of the time the colonized had only his own increasingly overshadowed inner convictions to oppose to the eminently traumatizing offenses of the press and the spectacular manifestations of the military and police power. Confronted daily with the wiping out of the last remaining of the righteous revolutionary soldiers, the civilian could fight off despair only by an act of faith, by an obstinate belief. Implementing what you're saying would give us a foundation that would fortify any insecurities that we have. Because this thing is tough. Life is tough as a whole, and doubt's going to seep in. And with the weathering and so forth, it's fundamentally more important. Has this changed today, from yesteryears?
It just looks different, right? And
right.
so because so this relative access has a has the ability to suppress the rebellion in and of itself. Again, because you think you can do, right? Now, meanwhile, we sit around and be mad about how we get treated when we go to these places that we claim we got access to. Because again, what you are actually up against is white supremacy, and whatever structural barriers exist, past and present, they exist because of white supremacy. And so so that means that even in situations where there has been, some limited or agreed upon access, what is still fundamentally undergirding the system is white supremacy, right? And so we struggle to really kind of understand that, but to Fanon's point, that's what the system is designed to do. It's designed to confuse you. And again, Neely Fuller. If you don't understand this, everything else will
Right.
simply confuse you. I mean, and so that's what this thing is supposed to do, right? And so we got to work harder, uh, and so this what the this is what the revolution looks like for us. It is centered around you know the education process. It is so all of that stay woke stuff is all predicated in being aware. That's where the thing comes from, and we keep even that we think that that's something that they just start saying. And that thing been a thing since forever, since we've been fighting. We've been wondering if we were awake and aware of what the clear and present danger was. So this metaphor of woke today, and it too is a function of this information. White folks have taken the word and made it into this pejorative term to justify their fight. And so it has literally kind of, erased and distorted, you know, anything that we've done or used centered around the concept at all. When Martin Luther King is talking about Rip Van Winkle, that's what he's talking about. You can't sleep through a revolution. He's talking about being woke. But you got to read that or hear it in order to know. And if you're waiting on them to tell you, they ain't. So you ain't gonna get to know. That's why it's our responsibility. You're on mute, Mike Jones.
Mike Jones, unmute yourself,
Yeah.
and I would love for you to tie the relevance, just as Dr. Alexander did, of the canon that Dr. Alexander has laid the case out for, and our actions, past, present, and future.
Well, I'll
And well, you're
co-sign.
famous for writing your own questions. I love it. But if you could intertwine that in the
No,
question that you're about to.
I think Charles has nailed it. We they are really telling you how important it is for us to be woke by how much they are against woke. Because the reason they don't want white folks to be woke, and they damn sure don't want black folks to be woke, because once you're awake, you're aware. That's literally
That's what it's about.
that's what it means. It literally means awareness. And the only way they can prevail and dominate is if you stay asleep, because they don't have the raw numbers and power to enforce their will on people who are aware. Okay? Because when you're woke and you're aware, you're making adjustments all the time in your flight and flight mind state that will always throw the predator that's hunting you off, no matter what kind of species you are. That's your defense mechanism. But if you sleep, the predator gets to come up on you and is on you before you know what's going on. So literally, what you could say, and I'll say this was kind of a thing at one point in time in the black community, especially when I was a kid. If somebody asked, "Well, what we gonna do?" Well, what did white folks say? And somebody said, "What white folks say?" He said, "And since we black, we need to do the other thing." Okay, that fundamentally they're never going to come up with a solution, an idea that is designed to benefit you. Any benefit we get from something they do is ancillary. So
Yes.
so it starts with a value system and a construction of reality that defines how these forces interact with each other. So if that's the white side of the room over there, I need to be looking for the black
I
side
need
of
to
the
get
room.
over here.
Yeah, I need to be over here. I don't even know what's over here, but I know whatever's over there wasn't for me.
Yeah.
Let me add,
And
that is outstanding. One last issue, Dr. Alexander. I often tell myself, and I've always told my children, that when you are in, what works for me and has worked for me is the constant reminder in these anxious situations that, I'll often ask, are you safe? Right now at this very moment, are you safe? So as we deal with, and the answer is 99.9% of the time, yes. And if it's not, get to safety. How do we combat these things to reduce this weathering that we're having, and things that we can implement on a daily basis? And we'll close out with your comments on that afterwards, Mike.
And so again, like it's like it ends up trying to get people to accept really the just most fundamental parts of this is that it literally starts with you at an individual basis, right? And it's like so like what you just did, like and like some folks would call that like a body scan, like what you just said, are you safe, right? And so you kind of start with that space, and so wherever you are you safe? Now, if you can establish that, you could probably, well, if you could establish that, you have you know a foundation upon which you could start to do the next step. So like then you have to create a ritual. How often, or a routine. How often can I get to this safe space? And then once, so I am safe, and every time I get to this space, I'm safe. How frequently can I get to this space? And so then once you get to that one, then you start to talk about what am I going to do in this space, right? Now, for some X number of people, once they establish all that, the first thing they're going to do is rest, which that's what they need. That's what they got to do, because we got to talk about what's in the basics. You got to eat, you got to sleep, you know. So you got to get those basics, and then once you built up to that I can take care of what has to be done. I can still access this space. What's next? That's when you start to, literally planning and executing, because you can do that from a safe space. You're not worried about flight. You're not worried about fight. It's in those spaces. And so then you can go from the sympathetic side, which is fight and flight, to the parasympathetic side, which is rest and digest. And in that space, you can start the build, right? You can kind of start the build. So it's literally trying to slow this thing down for you and then your household. And 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 and, and it has to kind of be in that order, and so and even for some folks, depending on how many people are in the household, they might not be able to do it for, if it's three people in the household, you probably need to start that process in the same way you started it with yourself. So instead of getting that space for yourself, don't then say, okay, I'm gonna do this for them too. No, you got to pick the next one and get them right, as opposed to trying to get both of them or however many people it is in the household. That's probably how it needs to go. And but that's kind of the nature of it, is just first trying to understand that, or appreciate that we are under duress, and these these are the implications for it, you know. And so again, like when we get back to the matrix, th- th- this is how far off that they got us. We look at the matrix and we think being able to decodify the matrix is an end. We think, you know, folks watch the matrix and if they understand it, they think, man, I got it. Well, you just understand the matrix. Now, the issue is if that pattern is a real thing, and I think we know that it is, can you actually apply that? So, really, the matrix is entertainment, it's art, it's a means to an end, and it's not an end in of itself. And so many times we get stuck in these spaces. Same thing with sinners, we represent sinners. Oh, did you know that this meant this, and this meant this, and this meant that? What difference does it make if you can't use that in your day to day? It is not understanding sinners, understanding matrix is not a end, it's a means. That's what the symbolism is for, you know. And so these are the trials. These are the things that we're going through. And so, like in the matrix, you gotta make a decision. You're gonna take the red pill or the blue. And
And
so, so
that is why this show has been so powerful to me, because in real time you showed what the applications of the knowledge base provides. And you're a mosaic through the mental health sphere along with the geopolitical sphere. But Mike Jones, is this has to me been just enlightening. Mike
Okay,
Jones.
okay. I'll close, Larry, with something that's personal or individual for the individual, like what Charles was doing, and tied to something that you did. Here's my Fanon close. He says, I, as a man of color, do not have the right to hope that in the white man there will be a crystallization of the guilt towards the past of my race. I find myself suddenly in the world, and I recognize I have one right alone, one duty alone, and that duty is not renouncing my freedom through my choices. And I'm done.
Ooh-wee. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for tuning in to the Level Set. Hit the like and subscribe button because the show has been showed. And I want to thank the Dr. Charles Alexander for giving us free therapy this morning. The Mike Jones for giving us all the necessary motivation we need for the week. And I'm Larry Fields. And we look forward to seeing you all soon, if it's God's will.